evening. Good to have you with us in the 9 p.m. edition of the Urban Debate. We start off with a focus on what is happening in the hospitals and the private hospitals across our country. And there have been many reports from across the states of helpless, desperate patients and their families being overcharged at every single step in these hospitals. Now, some of the states have even come up with guidelines with a system to stop the hospitals from overcharging, from looting the patients at a time when the pandemic has hit us. But that doesn't seem to be solving the problem. At best, it probably just puts a check on one hospital here and there. Here is why I believe we need to keep a check on pricing. In times of a pandemic where there is a huge demand and shortage of everything healthcare infrastructure-wise, the hospitals seem to be charging what they want for some of these treatments. Patients are not able to bear these high expenses. If only they had a better option in terms of public health care, but that's not the truth in many of parts of our country where, frankly, public health care is pretty abysmal. And so you don't have an option but to go to a private health care hospital, which then loots you, empties out your wallets. There is varied pricing without really any guidance, any benchmarking on what prices should be charged for what stuff. And I'm not just talking about the treatment itself or the room charges, but the 20,000 additional things that are added to your bills when you spend a few days in the hospital. Some of them are high rates in the garb of better services. Hospitals claim, well, we're providing you great services, we're providing you a 5-star-like facility, so why should we not charge you more for it? But there has to be some amount of kind of standardized link, really, between the services provided versus the cost that is being asked of us, and where does it really stop? To add to this, there is no proper redressal mechanism unless we decide to go to consumer court and then keep running around. So tonight, I want to focus on this issue and talk about it. Governments in Maharashtra and Karnataka have now stepped up on action against such hospitals. The Maharashtra government has extended its 80-20% order, where 80% of the private hospital beds were charged at government rates and only 20% were left to the private hospitals to charge the price that they wanted. Earlier, the treatment rates used to be same in cities and in villages under the 80-20 scheme now. But now the state government has said that private hospitals cannot charge exorbitant amounts for COVID treatment. Meanwhile, in Telangana, the High Court had to step in to remind the KCR government of its failure to cap the skyrocketing prices. And the High Court actually said, and I'm quoting them right now, that people are mortgaging gold to pay their hospital bills. Why have you not capped exorbitant prices by the private hospitals? Why is there no cap on prices on basics like PPE kits? Are you waiting for the pandemic to get over before you actually start fixing the prices and declaring the prices for some of these services and products? Court, in fact, went on to say, ask hospitals to refund the excessive fees or cancel their license. Tonight, I don't want to make this a witch hunt about a few hospitals. I don't want to sit here and simply criticize one hospital over the other. But I do want to talk about the larger systemic problem. And I think you will relate to it as much as anybody else, viewers. Because all of us would have experiences to tell. Some of us may have insurance covers, and that's a whole different problem in this pandemic. But we do know of the exorbitant prices that often do get charged, or prices that we don't understand. Can there be a little bit more transparency on it? Can there be a regulator who comes in and tracks this, keeps a check on the hospitals? Is it really necessary to have knee-jerk reactions where suddenly one government will wake up, send notices to 2 or 3 hospitals, take away their license and believe that that is the end of the problem? Will a regulator really help, or should the responsibility be that of the state governments themselves? Some of the questions that I have for our experts who are joining us right now. Dr. Vishnu Panikray, Group Head for Medical Strategy and Operations at Fortis Healthcare, joins us this evening. Uday Vavikar, Vice President for Consumer Courts Advocates Association in Maharashtra and Goa. Dr. Sanjeev Begai, Chairman for Nephron Clinics, joins us this evening as well. And Dr. Sanjay Nagral, Surgeon and Chairperson for Forum for Medical Ethics, with us this evening as well. Dr. Begai, let me start off with you. There is no denying that there will be problem in many hospitals of overcharging. But is there a, simple one-point solution to fixing this problem?
Good evening, Tanvi. Good evening, everyone on panel and all the viewers. Tanvi, just allow me 2 minutes flat because it's extremely important, because this topic is technical and I want people to actually understand what the root cause is. Unless until we don't address the root cause, we never find a solution. There is no question about it that you will have these bleeps. It happened during the dengue episode a few years back, 2 or 3 years back, in which there were exorbitant prices, and now again in COVID time. And I've said this on many forums, if the COVID doesn't kill you, the hospital bills will kill you. The pricing is distinctly opaque, it's arbitrary, it's dysfunctional, and my statement is how much is too much. And the root cause is when there is a imbalance of services, only 25% government and 75% private, then really the private calls the shot and they are law unto themselves. We need to grade the hospitals in terms of infrastructure, equipment, technology, manpower, specialization, number of beds, number of OTs, and so on. In fact, FICCI and CII, through them, we've submitted a 28 data point analysis to, and I will pray the government actually implement this, because it will give uniform shape to private healthcare. The next important point is almost all the private healthcares, at least in Delhi NCR, are on government land. This is either free or completely concessional. The question is how many of them are giving free beds and free OPD. They get income tax exemption. The land is owned by a fraud, fictitious, completely ill-qualified charitable trust in inverted commas. There is no charity going on there. The land is owned by a charitable trust, and believe me, there is no charity, and the money which is being siphoned off right out from the system, this is the most beautiful form of white-collar crime. This is on government land. And who bears the cost of this? It's the patients. Now, what do we need to do? Distinctly, we need to grade the hospitals. We need a regulator, but the redressal of it should be within 72 hours. A patient should not be running pillar to post, trying to... The private hospitals must make profit, but there is a distinction between profit and just an escalating infinite cost. Let me give you a couple of examples. ICU bed in Delhi before the pandemic was 13,500 to 15,000 as a room night. During the COVID time, it is crossing 70,000. A hospital bill which was coming as per day 45 to 50,000, maybe 60,000, in COVID times is coming to 1.5 lakhs per patient bed per night, multiplied by 10 days or 15 days. Not even an affluent family can afford these kind of charges. There are hidden charges. Suddenly, when a patient comes to the billing at the time of discharge, nurses' charges are added on extra, where actually they should be included in the bed pricing, and a lot of other miscellaneous administrative charges, local charges. There are enough amount of line items which are added on last minute. We need to address the pricing policy on a war footing. This is the main cause of the distrust between a doctor-patient relationship. Mind you, private hospitals are owned by large business families. They are not owned by doctors by and large. They are being invested by private equity. They look at numbers. You look at an Excel sheet. You look at profit and loss. Fair enough. But every patient is not a number. A patient is a living soul. The patient comes to us in need, in distress. And I think the patient's life is extremely important. We cannot decrease the price below a particular point because safety and quality, standardization of care is extremely important. But fair pricing is the name of the game. During the COVID time, Tanvi, the prices of the private healthcare have increased 3 to 4-fold. In some hospitals, 5-fold. That's what happened to the doctors. Doctors have taken a 50% pay cut. The rest is history.
A 50% pay cut, endless hours, risking their own health, the health of their families. Whereas on the other hand, you say, Dr. Begai, that the patients are being asked to pay 5 times what they would have paid otherwise, which also sometimes was exorbitant enough. So, Dr. Panigree, How do we solve this problem? How do we fix this problem? We've seen some of the states have come out with orders capping the prices, but that should be a one-time solution. We've seen in some instances, few of the hospitals have gotten a notice. But again, that's not going to be a solution to the larger problem. How do we fix that?
Tanvi, good evening. First, I'd like to say that on behalf of Fortis Healthcare, we have hospitals across the country. Every state, most of the states have got a capping. And this much I can say that we have lived within the capping. And you can check across with in Mumbai, in Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata, Chennai, in the Mohali. We have lived within that, and we have not digressed from that. Even the drugs that we use, it is we give it at a discounted rate than what is there. And I would like to just have a sort of a variance from what my co-panelist, Dr. Bagai, said. I think so we should not paint all private sector as just profiteering. And one thing I'd like to say is that states have put some mandate also, that is the capping. And I think so we have to also self-restrain ourselves, self-regulate ourselves. And that is what is expected, because this is the pandemic. All of us are social animals. If the other person is healthy, I'll be healthy. So I think that's very important. If I'm healthy and the other person is not healthy, all gets impacted. So this is a social responsibility from all of us. And I think so as healthcare providers, if you look at the wave 1, wave 2, and across the country, they are black sheep everywhere. I don't deny that. But in general, the private healthcare has stepped forward very well, and they have taken the brunt. If you are from in Mumbai, you would have seen how Fortis Mulund and Rahija Mahim how well they have done it. Across Delhi NCR, across Bangalore, the amount of work that they have done, we have lost lives also in the first wave, second wave, more so in the first wave because that time the vaccines were not there. But that has not stopped us from giving service. So I think so the self-regulation is there. So, and you can't expect that everyone, a policeman to keep coming after you. So what I suggest is that my humble request to everyone is that to all healthcare providers who are digressing, please look at it from a social point of view of providing service. And this is profit, as Dr. Bagai rightly mentioned. Profit is a thing that has to be there, because without that, how will you invest and keep enhancing your setup? But profiteering is not this is not the time for profiteering, and you should not look at this. So this is what I would like to say. And Tanvi, is that please look at healthcare as a social engagement from the private sector, and let us not sort of paint all in a black brush and say that all are black marketing, profiteering. I think so that's not fair. There are issues. What are you bringing up? I appreciate that. Anything that is going wrong, I think so the print media and electronic media have done an excellent job of highlighting this, and health has to be at the forefront of the public eye. And since it is not an electoral agenda, people don't take it seriously. Whether I'm talking about the political bureaucracy.
Yes.
So that's the reason that there's no sort of, they'll forget it. Public memory is very short. Once this goes off, we'll forget it.
No, but Dr. Panigri, if I may actually come in here, and I agree with you, and I am not sitting here and making a blanket statement about the entire industry or about all doctors, even that. But you know what Dr. Bagai was mentioning, and maybe Dr. Nagral would remember this, when we started off a lot of our special programming here on prime time, 3 years ago, Dr. Nagral, we had conversations, and I think this was around the time when the dengue cases were, going up, and there were multiple instances of overcharging that had come through. That's happening again now. And add to that, many other problems when it comes to, for example, insurance. Hospitals are so hesitant to take in those with cashless insurance policies. Many of the hospitals are asking for additional money up front, which is not part of the rate card, which will probably not even go into the bill. And I'm not talking about just the biggest metros here. I'm talking about other big cities across the states. So there are these issues, Dr. Nagral, that do exist, that just get heightened and maybe magnified during times like this. But how do we fix it?
Yeah, so Tanvi, so first of all, thank you for this opportunity. So you're absolutely right. The problem of high costs of healthcare or high expenses in healthcare is an old problem, and COVID has just magnified it. I largely agree with what Dr. Bagai, Dr. Panigrahi said, but something very interesting that both of them said, and I think Sanjeev said it, that of course the private sector must make profit, but they must not profiteer. Now, I don't know what is the difference between the two, and we can spend the whole evening discussing what is profit and what is profiteering. But I think the experience of the whole world shows us that in healthcare, once you have a for-profit sector, it's a slippery slope. It's not worked anywhere, and it's unlikely to work in India. You have to either have a public health system or you have to have a highly regulated system where the regulator is very strong. And we currently don't have either. But there's another issue which has come up specifically in the context of COVID, which is the complete lack of standardization of treatment, and that puts up the costs. So whilst we can hold forth about profit versus profiteering, we can talk about how this is an old problem. But what we have seen in this particular disease is a complete lack of following standard treatment guidelines. And that by itself has increased the costs. So whether it is the running around for plasma, whether it is the use of costly drugs, including, say, remdesivir, it has aggravated the already bad situation. Also, just one quick point in terms of, you talked about people don't have insurance and, covered, not covered. But let me share this, that the insurance industry in this country, with all its problems, is at a wit's end.
Yeah.
Because when they get the bills from hospitals, there is a long list of exceptions now. And that includes all sorts of very interesting headings. Headings like, it's interesting. You should do an analysis of the bills. So COVID charges, waste charges, PPE charges, mask charges, glove charges. Now, you see, so what I'm just trying to say is that it's very nice for Dr. Panigrahi to say that we are all social animals and therefore, but I think that needs to be demonstrated, that hospitals are willing to curb their normal style of functioning, which is that you control costs on one side and you create another heading. So that's very obvious. I've had my my doctor colleagues getting admitted who have got a bill of a lakh of rupees for the PPEs. Now, a PPE is used in wards by one single individual for 20 patients. So to charge one PPE per one patient is not really a rational practice. And therefore, I think it is true that the private sector has taken a lot of the burden. It is true that it has offered high quality care, especially in the intensive care sector. But it is also true that it has been business as usual, and it should not be business as usual. And therefore, the state has moved in. And I think the state has every right to move in. This is a pandemic. If they can control people's livelihoods, if they can control people's freedoms and movements, by all means, they should control costs in healthcare. So I think it's an exceptional situation and there is every basis for it.
Okay, if I may just bring in Mr. Vavekar as well, and then we'll go back to Dr. Panigrahi on some of the points that you have raised. But Mr. Uday Vavekar, is maybe having a regulator or a central body the good way to go about it, or will the consumer courts be enough, or should the onus be on state governments, as some of them have shown inclination to do?
Tanvi, you are right. The approach can be both ways. Am I audible?
Yes, you are, absolutely.
Yeah, approach can be both ways. As far as consumer courts are concerned, it's like a post problem. As far as the regulator is concerned, it is now. If you see today's Times of India, page 4, they have said 80-20 sharing bed with the private hospitals, and the norms, regulator norms have come in. A class, this will be the charges for ventilator. B class, this will be the charges. Charges are also quite reasonable and mentioned. as far as private hospitals are concerned, they have very clearly stated, like for example, for A class, B class and C class, a routine COVID isolation bed will cost 4,000 rupees. In a class A, it will be 3,000. In the B city, it will be 2,400. Class C city, it will be similarly ICU bed would cost you 9,000. So all this is divided class-wise. It is coming down, regulator is taking its steps. But at the same time, there are reports that private packages are also given by private hospitals and they have been given priority. There are reports that politicians are interfering for availability of the beds in scarcity. There are also reports that, a lot of charges, unscrupulous charges have been levied due to dominant situation. So therefore, to do all this, a regulator must have an audit or they must have a check back. Now, how do we audit this or how do we have a check back? There has to be a system coming for check back from the billings of the hospital on COVID patients, or at the same time, complaints should be immediately taken up for taking the cognizance of those complaints. Now the question comes is, this is what is a must because regulations have come in. But what about the monitoring of these regulations and implementation of these regulations? Unless they are implemented properly with a system like audit of this or system like checkup of this with a strong regulator, as was rightly pointed out by Satyam, it cannot happen. The malpractices which are reported, which are going on in Haryana also, as we have seen, as many places in Delhi also we have seen, is bound to happen. So therefore, to control this unscrupulous the facts, definitely the regulator has to come in and that has to be implemented. As far as Consumer Act is concerned, one can file a class action petition if there is a standard problem of many consumers together, like a PIL, and then regulatory guidelines can be issued, like for hallmark of the gold. But this step will be the first step if we come across further some and there is a problem with the regulator. We can even take regulator to the task through this class action petition. National Commission has done it in the gold, that is the hallmark of the gold case. It has done for Ahmedabad water distribution cases. So similarly, it can be done. But simultaneously, if you find such malpractices done, afterwards also compensations can happen. There are refunds being claimed, but this compensation should be given heavily. And now good news is under the new act, there is a regulating and controlling body, which is Consumer Protection Council at Central. They can take a mass action. For the masses, they can take action. Individually, consumer forum limits at the local level has been increased to the extent of 1 crore at the forum itself. This is called as district commission. And wherever the complainant will reside, this is the best thing that has come in the new act. If you are staying in Andheri, and even if you have been admitted to, say, a beach candy hospital, a person in Andheri, the patients residing at Andheri can file a case in Bandra, which is the nearest forum to him. So therefore, the act has got to change. Wherever you are residing, you can file a case now. And therefore, that's a big advantage. If there are extra charges, if there's excess billing, even the cashless insurance is not allowed, either due to deficiency of insurance company or due to the malpractices of the hospitals, which is called unfair trade practices under the Consumer Protection Act. You can challenge those bills for not only the reimbursement, but also for heavy compensation, losses, mental agonies. But as the National Commission has recently said in one of the case, of course, this was not a COVID case, where the hospital had not taken the patient in and saying that this you first fill up the form and deposit the amount and then only we'll allow you. This is happening today also. The case is applicable there. Justice M.B. Shah has very clearly said in that case, death cannot wait, money can wait. And therefore, the Hippocratic oath given to the doctors is applicable to hospitals, saying that don't wait, take the treatment first, and that is absolutely relevant in this.
Yes, so and in fact, that's something that came about during times of COVID as well, that you cannot wait. But very interesting points that you've raised, and I hope, that's helpful for our viewers as well. Dr. Bagai, you wanted to comment?
Just 3 quick points, Tanvi. First is undoubtedly the medical force all over India, like all over the world, have actually sacrificed their lives. Nothing is taking that, and it's a painful experience to see your very close friends succumb to COVID. But until we don't call out the problems within our system, we'll never come clean. Under the cover that we are doing great work, it doesn't mean there are a lot of people who are getting away with wrongdoings. We definitely need a regulation of the charges. Tanvi, I've done analysis of 58 hospitals in Delhi across almost 6,000 line items, including every variety of lab tests, including all radiology, all operative procedures. And the difference of pricing ranges from 60% going up to 150%. This is there on a huge Excel sheet. Now, this kind of differential pricing, when the quality approximately is the same, even if you grade the hospitals as in categories depending upon the specialization. One of the panelists has mentioned about the PPE kits. It's a famous thing. Everyone knows it. It's calling, having a white elephant in the room and turning a blind eye to it. One PPE kit serves 20 patients, but that one patient is charged for 2 PPE kits every day. Whereas that same PPE kit is being shared amongst 20 people. And this all adds up in the final billing. I think if this is not cheating, I don't know what it is. I mean, being in healthcare for close to 3.5 decades, I don't think this is fair. And last, most important is when you are having on charitable land, the charitable trust accounts need to be audited and made public. I can bet my last buck and tell you not one of these charitable trusts is spent on charity. They use this as an income tax exemption. They don't pay the taxes here. The investment comes from international PE funds. I'm repeating it again. The investment comes from international PE funds. The land which is government hold institutional charitable land is traded for and in inverted commas rented or sold. It's happening openly. If anyone can dispute it, I'll be very happy to be corrected wrong. I am right because I have the proofs with me.
Yes, and Dr. Bagai, while there isn't any wrong in finding investors from wherever, as long as it's helping us build private healthcare or healthcare in the country, it shouldn't be misused and abused, like you rightly pointed out, and the concessions that are being given shouldn't be misused in that manner. So that I agree. I have one question that I wanted to ask our experts, and it actually, Mr. Uddhav Thackeray was referring to what the Maharashtra government has done. But there, Mr. Thackeray, for example, the categorization has been city-wise. The grades have been, given geographically. But Dr.
Yes.
Panigrahi, can we not look at a system where we give that kind of categorization to hospitals, bases their facilities and services, and then say, okay, if it's a, star rating system, and if this is the level of services you provide, these are the kind of charges you can put out there, nothing more or less.
Yeah, I think so, Tanvi, we should not be looking at star ratings now in this pandemic time. And government has given guidelines that these are the cappings that have to be there. And I think so we have to self-regulate ourselves. And there are regulators there, see, because in every district, the CDMO is the nodal health authority of that district. So they have their machinery to check. And those who are not falling in line, they should be brought up. So we can't allow this to happen. What you all are bringing up is a very fair point. Wherever this digression is happening, people have to be held accountable. I don't deny that. We keep reading the papers and all that. But at least what I'm saying that there are a lot of good healthcare players who have performed well, have lived within that parameters. So what's happening is that unnecessarily every healthcare provider is now marked as not doing social service, just profiteering. So this is something that needs to change. And in this pandemic, they have stepped forward. Last year, in fact, I was in Bhubaneswar handling a PP project, 1,500 beds in Orissa. It was the first public health, public-private partnership. And it went off very well. So there was no patient roaming around, searching for a bed. It was always available. And the rates were fixed. There was no hanky-panky there. So I think so. What I want to say is that probably a good public-private partnership should have been sought after and put in place from the beginning to identify that these are the COVID hospitals and this is how you go about it.
Right. Okay, no, so of course, I mean, the terminology can change. I am just looking at here, Dr. Nagral, a system that brings about some amount of standardization, thereby transparency and accountability. And if I'm not mistaken, that's something that has been looked in the past as well. Can we not look at that kind of a system where you do a gradation method?
Yes, one can, although, you know, so there has been a concept of accreditation of hospitals. There has been a concept of gradation, and one can attempt it. But having said that, healthcare is quite a different animal from, you know, other industries, with so many factors which are very variable. And therefore, to translate ideas from other industries to healthcare is always a challenge. I just also want to respond to a few things that were said by my co-panelists, which is, so first of all, Dr. Panigrahi talked about social work. I don't think anybody expects social work from private hospital chains. I think it would be a little ingenious to talk about social work, etc. Clearly, these are chains which are expanding. They are, you know, if you see their records, they are expanding all over the country. So there is really no question of social work here. They are serving that section of the population, 10%, 20%, which can afford. And also they are filling in the space that has been vacated by government. So I think there is no question that they have very cleverly occupied that space and served that section of the population. But what we expect is transparency. What we expect is standard treatment guidelines so that people don't get the wrong medicines. What we expect is that the price of a drug, which is shown on a patient's bill, is actually the price of the drug. What we don't want is, you know, it's a separate discussion in itself, but it reflects on cost, which is that pharmaceutical companies give a drug at a particular amount, and that is given to the patient at 10 times the cost. So I think let's not talk about social service, etc. Let's at least say that let us be transparent. Let us try and transfer, at least in a pandemic situation, try and transfer some of the profits that traditionally are being made by these hospitals on some of these items to the patient. And then, of course, the state has to move in. To say that the private sector will self-regulate itself is a myth, because it's very, and I'm talking for the largely for-profit private sector, because that is their logic.
Yes.
And I don't think one sudden day they will say that, look, no, from tomorrow we are not going to make profits. We are suddenly going to turn sort of charitable. And even as Sanjeev said, charitable hospitals in India also, many of them are really out of bounds for most people. So I think it is a state which has to move in. I think the citizens of this country have to realize that we have gone very wrong on the way healthcare has developed. This is not a sustainable model, and this is going to bite us back.
Yes.
And therefore, it is people like you and me who have to say this, because the poor anyway are out of this discussion. They are anyway having a hard time. They cannot even come near these hospitals. So it is the middle class, the emerging middle class, which has to now seriously look at what is the healthcare model for this country.
Yes, either you have an extremely strong, you know, well-developed public healthcare system like several other countries do, or if you do have a greater, wider participation from the private sector, there has to be some more transparency and accountability as to what the cost structure there is. Otherwise, it becomes extremely difficult to afford any kind of healthcare in this country. I'm completely out of time, but thank you to all four of you for joining me and, you know, bringing in your insights. This is a nuanced conversation. It's not a black or white to say, oh, all hospitals are looting us and that's all they're interested in, and the doctors are only interested in making money. That's not what we are saying here. But we must acknowledge what is also going on. As we were speaking, viewers, I had one of the viewers write to me about the kind of charges that were billed in a hospital in a metro city. And I'm not going to name the city or the hospital, but this is how it went. Hospital ward charges 25,000 into 12. Oxygen charges 1,25,000 for 10 days. Monitor charges, yes, monitor charges 11 into 3,000. Then the pharmacy charges of 42,800, in all coming about to about 5 lakh bill, which was roughly for somebody who seemed to have stayed there for 10 days. This isn't really an acceptable, normal setup. This is what needs to change. We're not against anybody making money, including the private sector that's in the healthcare business. They should be allowed to make some money. But there should also be some amount of balance being brought in. And the states have in some cases stepped in now to bring in a cap. They're now defining it geographically. They're issuing show cause notices. They're sending people, experts, auditors, policemen to the hospitals to check. Should it really have to come to this? Do we really want to be those kind of COVID vultures who really take every single penny out of the patient's wallet? Something that even hospitals need to think about. Thank you for joining us on this conversation.